I got engaged and pregnant, but my fiancé's twin brother kept interfering with wedding plans. He criticized every decision I made and contacted my vendors to cancel everything. When I left, he violated my privacy by getting baby information from my OB without permission. Ron, 28M, and I, 26F, got engaged 6 months ago, and I also found out I was pregnant around the same time. We were both excited about starting our family together. Ron works in IT and I'm a teacher at an elementary school. We've always had a pretty stable relationship, or at least I thought we did until recently. Ron has a twin brother named Zeke. They've always been close, closer than most siblings I know. Growing up, they did everything together. They went to the same college, had the same friend group, and even worked at the same company for a while before Ron switched jobs. Zeke got married 2 years ago to his girlfriend Claire in a small backyard ceremony at their parents' house. It was a nice event, but Zeke apparently always regretted not having a bigger celebration. Claire comes from a large family and wanted something more intimate, so that's what they did. When Ron and I announced our engagement and pregnancy on social media, most people were supportive and congratulatory. My parents were thrilled, my friends were excited, and Ron's parents seemed genuinely happy for us. But Zeke's response was different. Within an hour of posting, he commented on the announcement saying he'd be the best man and that we should have the wedding in June because that's when the weather is perfect for outdoor photos. He also mentioned that he knew a great photographer we should use. I found it strange that he was already making these decisions without us even discussing them. Ron said Zeke was just being enthusiastic and trying to help. I let it go because I didn't want to start any conflict right after our announcement. A few days later, Zeke texted me directly. He said he'd been thinking about our wedding and had lots of ideas to share. He wanted to meet up for coffee to discuss everything. I told him that Ron and I hadn't even started planning yet and we'd let everyone know when we made decisions. He responded that he just wanted to help since he'd been through it before and knew what mistakes to avoid. I showed the text to Ron and he said it was nice that Zeke cared so much. He suggested we meet with him just to hear him out. So we did. We met Zeke and Claire at a cafe downtown. Zeke brought a notebook filled with ideas. He had venue suggestions, color schemes, timeline recommendations, and even a budget breakdown. Most of his ideas were expensive and not really our style. Ron and I had talked about having something simple and meaningful, not elaborate. When I politely explained that we were thinking of something smaller and more personal, Zeke looked disappointed. He said that this was a once-in-a-lifetime event and we shouldn't settle for less than perfect. He specifically mentioned that he wished he'd had a bigger wedding and didn't want us to have the same regrets. Claire sat quietly through most of this conversation, occasionally nodding but not really contributing. Ron tried to smooth things over by saying we'd consider all the options. I stayed quiet because I didn't want to argue in public. After they left, I told Ron that I appreciated Zeke's input, but we needed to make our own decisions. He agreed but said we should keep Zeke involved so he wouldn't feel left out. Over the next few weeks, Ron and I started making actual plans. We chose a small community center for the ceremony that had special meaning for me. My dad passed away when I was 16 and the community center was where we'd had his memorial service. It sounds strange, but I always found the place peaceful and wanted to honor his memory by having my wedding there. We decided on a casual buffet-style reception because we wanted people to relax and enjoy themselves rather than sit through a formal plated dinner. For music, Ron wanted to hire a DJ who was friends with someone from his work. The guy had good reviews and his prices were reasonable. Ron told Zeke about our plans during one of their weekly phone calls. Apparently, Zeke had opinions about everything. He said the community center looked outdated in the photos online. He thought a buffet was too informal for a wedding and that we should do a plated dinner with assigned seating. He also said we should hire a professional band instead of a DJ because it would be classier. Ron defended our choices by saying they were what we wanted and what fit our budget. But Zeke kept pushing. He called me separately and said he was concerned that we were making decisions too quickly without thinking them through. He offered to help us find a better venue and even said his parents might contribute more money if we chose something nicer. I thanked him but told him we were happy with our plans. He sighed and said he hoped we wouldn't regret it later. When I picked out my bridesmaid dresses, I chose a soft peach color. My sister Dakota was my maid of honor and I had 2 friends from college as bridesmaids. My mom and I went dress shopping together along with Dakota. We had appointments at 2 bridal shops. At the first shop, I tried on several dresses and found one I really liked. It was simple, elegant, and fit well. The consultant said she could order it in my size and have it ready in 4 months. As we were finishing up at the first shop, Zeke and Claire walked in. Ron's mom had apparently mentioned our shopping plans to Claire, who told Zeke. He said they were in the area and wanted to see what I chose. I was surprised but tried to be polite. Zeke immediately started commenting on the peach bridesmaid dresses displayed in the shop. He said peach washes people out and that we should consider navy or burgundy instead. He also looked at the dress I'd chosen and said it might not be flattering once I started showing more from the pregnancy. Dakota stepped in and said the dress was beautiful and that we'd already made our decision. Zeke kept talking about how important it is to choose the right style and how pregnant brides need to be careful about certain cuts. My mom looked uncomfortable and suggested we head to lunch. Zeke and Claire left around the same time we did. That evening, Ron called to ask how the shopping went. I told him everything, including Zeke's comments. He said Zeke probably didn't mean anything by it and was just trying to be helpful. I said it didn't feel helpful, it felt intrusive. Ron went quiet and then said he'd talk to his brother. A few days later, Ron told me he'd spoken to Zeke and that Zeke promised to back off a bit. I hoped that would be the end of it. But Zeke's behavior continued. Every time we made a decision about the wedding, he had something to say about it. When we chose our cake flavors, he said we should do a tasting at a fancier bakery. When we picked our flowers, he said they were too simple. When we finalized our guest list, he questioned why we weren't inviting certain people he thought should be there. Ron kept making excuses for him. He said Zeke meant well and just wanted our day to be special. But it was starting to wear on me. I told Ron that I needed him to set firmer boundaries with his brother. He said he would, but nothing really changed. 3 months before the wedding, things got worse. I received an email from the community center saying they'd received a cancellation request. I called them immediately and said I hadn't requested any cancellation. The coordinator said someone claiming to be our wedding planner had called and said we found a different venue. I told them we didn't have a wedding planner and that the booking should remain as is. They apologized and said they'd make a note in our file. The same day, our caterer called and said someone had contacted them about changing the menu from buffet to plated service. I told them we wanted to keep the buffet and asked who had called. They said it was a man who identified himself as the best man and said he was helping coordinate details. I immediately knew it was Zeke. I called Ron at work. I explained what happened and said we needed to deal with Zeke immediately. Ron sounded shocked and said he'd call his brother right away. I also called all our other vendors and set up passwords so no one could make changes without both Ron and me providing the code word. That evening, Ron came home and said we needed to meet with Zeke to clear everything up. I said there was nothing to clear up. Zeke had crossed a line and shouldn't be part of the wedding planning anymore. Ron said his brother deserved a chance to explain himself. I didn't want to go, but Ron insisted it would help resolve things. We met Zeke at a restaurant the next day. Ron asked him directly if he'd contacted our vendors. Zeke didn't deny it. He said he was trying to help us avoid making mistakes we'd regret. He said the community center wasn't good enough and that a buffet would look cheap in photos. He thought if he could show us better options, we'd see that he was right. I told him he had no right to make those calls and that it almost cost us our venue. He said he was just being a good brother and looking out for us. Ron looked between us and then asked me if I could give Zeke one more chance. He said Zeke was only trying to help and that we should understand he had good intentions. I stared at Ron. I couldn't believe he was siding with his brother after everything Zeke had done. I stood up from the table and walked out of the restaurant. I drove to Dakota's apartment and stayed there that night. Ron called multiple times but I didn't answer. The next morning, Zeke texted me. He said I was overreacting and that my pregnancy hormones were making me irrational. An hour later, Ron sent almost the exact same message. He wrote that I shouldn't let my hormones make me do something I'd regret. I realized then that Ron would always choose Zeke over me. They weren't just close siblings. Ron couldn't function without his brother's approval and input. I'd been so focused on planning a wedding that I hadn't seen how deeply their relationship affected Ron's ability to be an independent person. I texted Ron that I needed time to think. He responded asking when I'd come home. I said I didn't know. He called Zeke and I could see from the social media activity that they were together that evening. The two of them posted a photo from a bar with a caption about brothers sticking together. I spent the next few days at Dakota's place. My mom came over and we talked about everything. She'd noticed how much influence Zeke had over Ron but hadn't wanted to say anything. She asked what I wanted to do. I said I didn't know yet. I just knew I couldn't marry someone who wouldn't stand up for me. Dakota suggested I talk to a lawyer, not because I wanted to be dramatic, but because I needed to understand my options regarding custody and what would happen if Ron and I didn't get married. I made an appointment with a family law attorney for the following week. Ron kept texting. He apologized and said he should have handled things differently. But he also said I needed to understand that Zeke just wanted what was best for us and that I was being too hard on him. Every message made it clearer that Ron didn't actually understand what the problem was. I started packing my things from the apartment Ron and I shared. I'd been living there for a year but most of my belongings were still easy to separate from his. Dakota and my mom helped me box everything up. Ron wasn't home during this. He was at work and I told him I'd be there during the day to get my stuff. While packing, I found some papers on Ron's desk. One was a printout of baby name lists. All the names were circled with notes in Zeke's handwriting. Another paper had a rough timeline for a gender reveal party with Zeke listed as the organizer. I took photos of everything with my phone. When Ron came home that evening, I was finishing loading boxes into my car. He asked if we could talk. I said fine. We sat in the living room and he started apologizing again. He said he knew he'd messed up and that he should have supported me more. He said Zeke was just excited about becoming an uncle and got carried away. I asked him if Zeke was excited or if Zeke was treating our baby like it was partly his. Ron looked confused. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos of the papers I'd found. I asked him why Zeke was making lists of baby names for our child. Ron's face changed. He said Zeke had just been brainstorming ideas in case we wanted suggestions. I asked him directly if he'd told Zeke the baby's gender. We'd found out at my last appointment, but I'd asked Ron not to share it with anyone yet because I wanted to tell our families together. Ron didn't answer right away. Then he admitted that Zeke had asked and he'd told him. He said Zeke was his twin and he told Zeke everything. I asked what else he'd told Zeke. He said they'd been planning a small gender reveal as a surprise for me. I asked if he'd given Zeke permission to call my doctor's office. He looked at the floor and said Zeke had been curious about when we'd find out the gender and Ron might have mentioned the appointment date. I stood up and told him I was done. I said we wouldn't be getting married and that any future communication about the baby would go through my lawyer. He started talking faster, saying I was overreacting and that we could fix this. I told him there was nothing to fix. He'd made his choice every single time and it was never me. I left and went back to Dakota's apartment. Ron called repeatedly that night. I blocked his number. Zeke also tried calling and texting. I blocked him too. The next morning, Ron's mom called me. She was crying. She said she'd heard what happened and wanted to apologize. She said she'd raised her sons to be close but she never meant for it to become unhealthy. She said Zeke had always been the more dominant twin and Ron had always followed his lead. She told me she'd spoken to both of them and said they'd ruined a good relationship because they couldn't establish proper boundaries. She offered to testify or provide a statement for any custody proceedings if it would help protect me and the baby. I thanked her and said I'd let her know. I met with the lawyer. She listened to everything and said I had a solid case for primary custody. She also said Zeke's behavior could be documented as harassment if it continued. We started drafting a custody agreement that would give Ron limited visitation with supervision until we could establish that he wouldn't let Zeke interfere with parenting decisions. Over the next week, Zeke's behavior got stranger. He posted on social media about how some people don't appreciate family and how blood is thicker than water. Then he sent me a long text message. It started with him saying I'd ruined his brother's life and ended with him saying he hoped my baby would be born with health problems so I'd understand what real difficulty was like. I saved the message and forwarded it to my lawyer. Ron's mom called again after seeing the message. Zeke had apparently sent her a copy too, bragging about telling me off. She said she'd told Zeke she was ashamed of him and that he needed professional help. Zeke had responded by blocking her number. Ron sent one final text from a different number. He said his mom wasn't speaking to him and Zeke was angry because Ron had apparently expressed some doubt about whether they'd handled things correctly. He said he was falling apart and didn't know what to do. I didn't respond. Update 1: Dakota found me a small 2-bedroom apartment near my parents' house. The rent was affordable and the landlord was willing to work with my timeline since I'm pregnant. My mom and Dakota helped me move in. We spent a weekend painting the second bedroom for the nursery. I chose a light yellow color, the same shade family I'd originally wanted for the bridesmaid dresses before Zeke started criticizing everything. The custody lawyer filed the initial paperwork. Ron was served with the documents at his workplace. He tried calling Dakota to get her to convince me to talk to him. She told him to communicate through his lawyer like the papers instructed. 3 days after Ron was served, something bizarre happened. I started getting messages from people I barely knew asking about my wedding. Apparently, Zeke had created a Facebook event for a party he was calling a celebration of new beginnings. The event description said it was honoring the next chapter for Zeke and Ron. The event photo was a picture of the two of them that someone had edited to look like a wedding photo, with Zeke in a suit and Ron in similar formal wear. The date was set for what would have been my wedding day. Several of Ron's cousins commented on the event asking what it was about. Zeke responded that it was a brother's celebration and that people would understand when they got there. One cousin replied asking if it was some kind of joke. Zeke deleted that comment. Claire, Zeke's wife, posted on her own page that she was confused and concerned about Zeke's recent behavior. She said she'd tried talking to him but he kept insisting that he was helping Ron get through a difficult time. She said she was staying with her sister for a while. I called my lawyer and showed her the event page. She said it was definitely evidence of ongoing harassment and obsessive behavior. She took screenshots of everything and said we'd include it in our filing for a restraining order against Zeke. My former mother-in-law called again. She said she'd seen the event and had tried to talk sense into Zeke. He'd told her that he was just trying to show Ron that they didn't need anyone else and that brothers should stick together no matter what. She said she'd asked Zeke outright if he understood that his behavior had cost Ron his relationship and future family. Zeke had responded that I was never right for Ron anyway and that Ron would realize that eventually. She also told me something I hadn't known before. Apparently when Zeke got married, Ron had been upset because he felt like Claire was taking Zeke away from him. Zeke had reassured Ron by saying that Claire would never be more important than their twin bond. Ron had been Zeke's best man and had given a speech about how the two of them would always be a team first. Claire's family had found the speech odd but no one said anything at the time. Now it made sense why Zeke had reacted so strongly to my relationship with Ron. He saw me as a threat to their dynamic. The wedding venue reached out to confirm the cancellation since the date was approaching. I told them yes, we wouldn't be using their space. They were understanding and returned my deposit since the cancellation was far enough in advance. I also had to contact all the other vendors. The caterer, the DJ, the florist, the photographer. Everyone was professional about it. A few asked if everything was alright and I just said there'd been a change in circumstances. The photographer was especially kind. She said she'd keep my deposit as credit in case I ever wanted family photos done in the future. My principal at school had been supportive throughout everything. She knew I was pregnant and that things had ended with Ron. She didn't pry for details but made sure I knew I could adjust my schedule if needed. I was teaching 3rd grade and the kids had started noticing my growing belly. They asked innocent questions about the baby and whether I was excited. I kept my answers simple and positive. Dakota threw me a small baby shower at her apartment. It was just my close friends, my mom, and a few cousins. No one from Ron's family except his mom, who I'd invited because she'd been genuinely supportive. She brought a handmade baby blanket and cried when she apologized again for her son's behavior. She said she'd tried her whole life to raise good men and didn't know where she'd gone wrong. I told her she'd done her best and that some things were beyond a parent's control. During the shower, my phone buzzed with a notification. Zeke had tagged me in an Instagram story. It showed him at a bridal shop holding up a wedding dress with a caption about planning ahead. I showed Dakota and she immediately reported the post. Several of my friends did the same. Instagram took it down within a few hours for harassment. My lawyer sent a formal cease and desist letter to Zeke. It outlined all his actions over the past month and stated that any further contact or posting about me would result in legal action. The letter was sent via certified mail to both Zeke's home and his workplace. 2 days after Zeke received the letter, Claire filed for divorce. She posted a brief statement on Facebook saying she'd tried to work through her husband's issues but couldn't continue in a marriage where she came second to his brother. Several people commented with support for her decision. Ron sent an email to my lawyer asking if we could set up a meeting to discuss custody arrangements. My lawyer responded with our proposed terms. Ron would get supervised visits once the baby was born, with supervision provided by his mother since she was the only member of his family I trusted. The visits would be at a neutral location, not his home. Zeke would not be allowed any contact with the child. Any gifts or communication from Zeke would be refused. Ron's lawyer responded that the terms were too harsh and that Zeke had a right to be in his niece's life as the uncle. My lawyer sent back all the documented evidence of Zeke's harassment, including the disturbing text message wishing health problems on the baby. Ron's lawyer didn't respond after that. Ron tried emailing me directly, even though he'd been told to go through lawyers. He said Zeke was going through a hard time with the divorce and didn't mean the things he'd said. He asked if we could co-parent more flexibly and if I really thought Zeke was dangerous. I forwarded the email to my lawyer without responding. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks away. My lawyer said we had a strong case based on the documented harassment, the unauthorized contact with wedding vendors, the disturbing text message, and the recent social media behavior. My mom suggested I stay with her until after the baby was born. My apartment was fine but she wanted to be able to help me in those first few weeks. I agreed. We moved the nursery furniture and supplies to her house and set up the spare bedroom. I was 7 months pregnant now. Work was getting harder as I got more tired and my body changed. I planned to work until 2 weeks before my due date but my principal said I could start leave earlier if needed. One evening, Ron showed up at my mom's house. I don't know how he knew I was staying there. My mom answered the door and told him I didn't want to see him. He asked to just talk for 5 minutes. She said no and closed the door. He sat in his car outside for an hour before finally leaving. I called my lawyer the next morning and she filed a police report for the violation of boundaries. The restraining order hearing arrived. Zeke was required to be there. He showed up without a lawyer, representing himself. The judge reviewed all the evidence. Zeke tried to explain that he'd just been protective of his brother and that I'd overreacted to everything. The judge asked about the text message wishing harm on my baby. Zeke said he'd been angry and didn't mean it literally. The judge granted a temporary restraining order for 6 months with the possibility of extension. Zeke was required to stay at least 100 yards away from me at all times and could not contact me through any means, including social media. He was also prohibited from contacting any of my family members or friends. Violation of the order would result in immediate arrest. Ron was not included in the restraining order since he was the father and needed to be able to coordinate custody matters. But the judge warned him that any harassment or unwanted contact outside of lawyer-approved communication would result in consequences. After the hearing, Ron's mom pulled me aside. She said Ron had moved back in with her because he couldn't afford the apartment on his own. Zeke was apparently living there too since Claire had kept their house in the divorce filing. She said the two of them barely spoke to each other now. Ron blamed Zeke for ruining his life and Zeke blamed Ron for not being loyal enough. She said it was painful to watch her sons destroy their relationship with each other because they'd never learned healthy boundaries. Update 2: I gave birth to a healthy baby girl. I named her Felicity after my grandmother. The delivery went smoothly and my mom and Dakota were both there with me. I didn't tell Ron I was in labor. I figured he'd find out soon enough. 2 days after bringing Felicity home, my lawyer contacted Ron's lawyer to inform him of the birth and to schedule the first supervised visit. Ron responded immediately asking to meet Felicity as soon as possible. We set up the first visit for the following week at a family counseling center that offered supervised visitation services. The visit was scheduled for 1 hour. Ron's mom would be present along with a professional supervisor from the center. When I arrived with Felicity, Ron was already there. He looked different, thinner and tired. When he saw Felicity, his eyes filled with tears. The supervisor took Felicity from me and handed her to Ron. I stayed in the room as required. Ron held Felicity carefully and kept staring at her face. He told her she was beautiful and that he was sorry for everything. His mom sat next to him and helped support the baby's head when Ron's hands started shaking. I sat across the room and watched. After 30 minutes, Felicity started crying. Ron looked panicked and tried to calm her, but she was hungry and needed to eat. I took her back and went to a private room to nurse. When I returned, the hour was almost up. Ron asked when the next visit would be. The supervisor said we could schedule weekly visits for now and potentially increase them if everything went well. Over the next month, Ron had 4 visits with Felicity. Each one was similar. He held her, talked to her softly, and looked sad the entire time. His mom attended every visit and often had to excuse herself to cry in the bathroom. She kept apologizing to me for how things turned out. After the 4th visit, Ron asked if he could bring a gift for Felicity next time. The supervisor said it needed to be approved first. Ron said he'd bought her a stuffed animal and some baby clothes. I agreed to let him bring them to the next visit. When he arrived the following week, he had a small gift bag. Inside was a soft teddy bear and 3 onesies. I checked them carefully. One of the onesies had a note pinned to it in Zeke's handwriting that said "From Uncle Zeke." I removed the note and handed the onesie back to Ron, saying I couldn't accept anything from Zeke. Ron looked embarrassed and said Zeke had insisted on including something. I said Zeke was under a restraining order and any attempt to have contact with Felicity through Ron would end the visits entirely. Ron apologized and took back that onesie. The supervisor made a note in her report about the incident. That evening, Zeke posted on Facebook for the first time in weeks. He wrote a long post about family betrayal and how some people use children as weapons. He didn't mention me by name, but it was obvious who he meant. Several people commented telling him to move on. His post was reported and removed within hours. The next day, Ron's lawyer contacted mine asking to modify the custody arrangement. Ron wanted overnight visits at his mother's house. My lawyer asked why the change. Ron's lawyer said Ron had been working on himself and proved he could be a good father. My lawyer asked for documentation of any counseling or parenting classes Ron had taken. Ron's lawyer couldn't provide any. We denied the request for modification. Ron could continue supervised visits at the center. A week later, Claire reached out to me through Facebook. She apologized for not seeing how bad Zeke's behavior had gotten sooner. She said she'd been so focused on trying to keep her marriage together that she'd ignored the warning signs. She said Zeke had become obsessed with Ron again after their divorce and talked about how they needed to show everyone that they didn't need wives or girlfriends to be happy. She also warned me that Zeke had been talking about finding ways around the restraining order. He'd apparently asked mutual friends to check my social media and report back about Felicity. Claire said she was telling me this because she didn't want Zeke to cause more problems for my daughter. I thanked her for the information and made my social media accounts completely private. I also asked friends and family not to post any photos of Felicity online. Ron's next visit was tense. The supervisor noted that he seemed distracted and kept checking his phone. When the hour ended, Ron asked to speak with me privately. The supervisor said that wasn't part of the arrangement. Ron said he just needed 5 minutes. I agreed, but only with the supervisor present. Ron said Zeke wanted to apologize and asked if there was any way he could send a letter. I said no. Ron said Zeke had been in a bad place mentally and now regretted his actions. I reminded Ron about the text message wishing harm on my baby. Ron went quiet. Then Ron said something that caught me off guard. He said he'd been thinking a lot about everything and realized Zeke had influenced most of his decisions in our relationship. He said he never actually cared about the wedding details Zeke criticized. He said he'd just gone along with everything Zeke said because that's what he'd always done. I asked him why he was telling me this now. He said because he wanted me to know he understood what happened and that he was working on becoming his own person. I asked if he was in therapy. He said not yet, but he was considering it. I told him therapy might help, but it didn't change the current custody arrangement. At the next visit, Ron brought a notebook. He said he'd been writing down thoughts and questions about being a father. He asked things like when Felicity started smiling and whether she seemed to recognize him yet. I answered his questions briefly. He wrote down everything I said. His mom pulled me aside during that visit and said Ron and Zeke had a huge fight the week before. Ron had apparently told Zeke that he needed space and that Zeke's behavior had cost him his family. Zeke had responded by moving out of their mom's house and cutting off contact with both of them. She said she didn't know where Zeke was staying but that he'd blocked both her and Ron on everything. I told her that was probably for the best. She agreed but said she was worried about Zeke's mental state. 2 weeks later, my lawyer received a letter from Zeke's new lawyer. Zeke was requesting grandparent rights on behalf of his parents to Felicity. The letter argued that since Zeke was Felicity's uncle and his parents were her grandparents, they should have protected legal rights to visitation. My lawyer responded that grandparent rights didn't extend to uncles and that Ron's mom already had access to Felicity through the supervised visits she attended. The letter also noted that Zeke was under a restraining order for harassment and that any legal filing on his behalf regarding Felicity would be seen as a violation of that order. Zeke's lawyer didn't respond after that. Ron's visits continued weekly. Felicity was 3 months old now and starting to become more alert and interactive. Ron noticed when she started tracking movement with her eyes and when she began cooing. He took photos during the visits, which was allowed under supervision. At one visit, Ron asked if he could read to Felicity. The supervisor said yes. He'd brought 3 children's books. He sat with Felicity on his lap and read all 3 books in different voices. Felicity seemed to enjoy the sounds and movements. It was the first time I'd seen Ron look genuinely happy since before everything fell apart. After that visit, his mom asked if I'd consider allowing Ron to have visits at her house with her supervision instead of at the center. She said the center was expensive and that Ron was clearly trying to be a good father. I said I'd think about it but couldn't make any promises. Update 3. It's been 4 months since my last update. Felicity is now 7 months old. She's crawling and starting to pull herself up on furniture. She's also babbling constantly and has started saying what sounds like mama, though I'm not sure if she knows what it means yet. Ron has continued his weekly visits. 2 months ago, I agreed to let him have visits at his mom's house with her supervision. The transition went smoothly. Ron seemed more comfortable in a home setting and Felicity responded well to the change in environment. His mom has been respectful of all the boundaries I set. Ron started seeing a therapist 6 weeks ago. His mom told me because Ron had asked her to. He wanted me to know he was working on understanding why he'd prioritized Zeke's opinions over our relationship. She said his therapist had diagnosed him with codependency issues related to being a twin. I haven't asked for details beyond that. It's not my business anymore how Ron deals with his issues. I only care about whether he can be a stable parent for Felicity. Zeke has stayed away. The restraining order is still in place and he hasn't violated it since the failed attempt to send a gift through Ron. According to Ron's mom, Zeke moved to a different city about 2 hours away. He got a job at a tech company there and hasn't been in contact with his family. Claire's divorce was finalized last month. Ron asked last week if we could extend his visits to 2 hours. He said he wanted more time to do activities with Felicity like going to the park or reading more books. I discussed it with my lawyer and we agreed to extend the visits, but they would still need to be at his mom's house with her present. During his first 2-hour visit, Ron brought Felicity a toy that plays music when buttons are pressed. She loved it and kept hitting the buttons over and over. Ron sat on the floor with her and made up songs to go with the music. His mom took a video and asked if she could send it to me. I said yes. Watching that video later, I noticed Ron looked different. He'd gained back some weight and didn't seem as defeated as he'd been in the early visits. I don't know if therapy is helping or if he's just adjusting to the new reality. Either way, he seems to be trying. I'm not interested in reconciliation. That part of my life is over. Ron made choices that showed me who he was and I can't forget that. But I'm willing to work toward a functional co-parenting relationship for Felicity's sake. My lawyer is drafting a more permanent custody agreement now that we've established a pattern of successful visits. The agreement will give Ron increasing amounts of time with Felicity as she gets older, with the eventual possibility of unsupervised visits if he continues therapy and demonstrates consistent appropriate behavior. I moved out of my mom's house last month and back into the apartment Dakota helped me find. The nursery is fully set up now with the yellow walls. Felicity's crib is in there along with shelves of books and toys. My mom visits several times a week and Dakota comes by at least twice a week to help with Felicity or just to have dinner. Work has been manageable. I returned after 12 weeks of leave and my principal arranged for me to have a slightly modified schedule for the rest of the school year. The third graders I teach made welcome back cards for me and several drew pictures of babies that they said were Felicity. Life is different than I imagined it would be at this point. I thought I'd be married with a partner to help raise Felicity. Instead, I'm doing this alone with support from my mom and sister. But Felicity is healthy and happy, and that's what matters. Ron's mom asked me recently if I'd be willing to let Felicity meet Ron's dad. I'd met him briefly when Ron and I were together but hadn't seen him since everything happened. She said he wanted to be part of Felicity's life and had been respectful of my need for space up until now. I said I'd consider it but wanted to meet with him first without Felicity to make sure we were on the same page about boundaries. We met at a coffee shop last week. Ron's dad apologized for his son's behavior and said he took responsibility for not teaching them better relationship skills. He said he'd like to be a grandfather to Felicity but understood if I needed more time. He also said he'd cut off financial support to Zeke and hadn't spoken to him in months after learning the full extent of Zeke's harassment. I appreciated his honesty. I told him he could attend one of Ron's visits next month to meet Felicity and we'd see how it went from there. He thanked me and said he wouldn't let me down. I don't know what the future looks like. I don't know if Ron will continue making progress or if he'll eventually fall back into old patterns. I don't know if Zeke will stay away or if he'll try something else once the restraining order expires. I don't know how I'll explain all of this to Felicity when she's old enough to ask questions. What I do know is that I made the right decision by leaving. Felicity deserves to grow up seeing healthy relationships and clear boundaries. She deserves a mother who doesn't compromise her values or accept disrespect. I can give her that even if I'm doing it alone. Now let's move to the next story. Story 2. Anonymous email revealed my